In the back of your mind, have you been wondering, questioning, is my husband possibly on the spectrum? My kid's like, I think there's something going on, but I'm not sure. Is it possible they're autistic? If you're wondering these questions and you feel some alarm in your heart, I have 3 steps that you can take that will help you to understand the situation and know what to do next.
Hey friend, do the daily demands of family life leave little time for self-care? Are you losing yourself in the process of caring for others? Are you ready to make self-care and healthy boundaries a natural part of your day while embracing your roles as a wife and mom? Well, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Christina, married 17 years to a neurodiverse man, mom of 3 neurodiverse kids, and many more roles. Welcome to the Moms in Neurodiverse Families podcast. Get ready to begin your self-care journey. Grab your planner and listen in as we take another small step towards a peaceful, healthier you.
Hey, before we dive in, I want to remind you of my email list. I send periodic, usually about every 2 weeks, an email with encouragement, information about self-care coaching, and just helping you through the daily challenges that we face in neurodiverse families. The link is in the show notes for that email list, and I highly encourage you to join. And let's go jump in about today's topic, which is focusing on, you think your husband or your kids or both are autistic, and what do I do? It can be overwhelming when you are considering the possibility and which steps to take. When I began collecting these moments, these this is really odd and weird, I don't understand it type of moments. One of them was many, many years ago. I was still working full time, and it was early in the morning and making breakfast. And my goal at the time was to have breakfast completed for myself and my morning routine before I got the kids awake, because it was an endeavor to do all of that jazz before I had breakfast. So I made sure I had a decent meal, and I had a box of cereal. I was opening the bag, and my husband was downstairs, and it was quiet in the house, and the only sounds was just the bag being open. The sound of the bag opening was awful for his ears, and he became incredibly upset and irritated and was wondering why I was being so rude and how could I do that? I'm making so much noise. It's piercing his ears. And I was completely dumbfounded. I'm like, I don't understand. I'm opening a bag of cereal, something I've done hundreds of times with different people. And this happened multiple times in the morning. And again, I was operating on my past assumptions where I opened up a bag of cereal or a can, or you're working in the kitchen, and the responses I normally had from people, I knew that singing on top of my lungs and slamming cupboard doors and all that kind of jazz, that did not work out. That was way too loud to be in a kitchen. There was definitely ways that you operate in a kitchen that was respectful of other people around you, and I got that. It really confused me how sounds that other people never seem to react to for my husband was a humongous issue. And I began collecting these data points and thinking, this doesn't make sense. I kept thinking maybe it's me. But as I reflected, I realized it wasn't me, it was the sounds. And then I looked at my children and realizing, wow, their reactions to foods are off the charts. I was the oldest of 5 kids. I babysat. I had many children I was around and took care of, and I knew the general what to expect with kids, but their responses to food was way outside the norm. These moments in your life and in my life are important because they cause us to pause and wonder, why is this person acting that way? So if you are having these questions yourself, these are the 3 things I would suggest that you would do. And the first one is learn. Now notice I'm not telling you to make phone calls and make appointments. Learn. You need to learn what is autism, and from 2 different angles. Okay, first, as a child, what is autism from the experts who are focused on the best quality of life for the child. Not, oh, you know what? This is the best it's going to be. You need to learn just to accept. Like, no, what is from a optimistic, a forward thinking, whatever we can do perspective, what is their perspective of life from a practitioner? And also looking for adults who are reflecting backwards as a child, their experiences. Sometimes you can't find autistic children who share their experiences. All of that information is so important to understand. And the same thing for the adult, for your husband. Or maybe you have an adult daughter that you are considering, adult son. Is one, look for resources that describe what autism is in an adult. And that's from a practitioner perspective, but also very firmly believe you should also look at those who are neurodiverse from an autistic perspective. What do they say? How they're experiencing life? And also, the third one of that is women who are neurotypical, who do not fit the diagnosis, who are married to these men. What are their experiences? All of that learning is very important to understand. What is autism? What is not autism? The one caveat is when you read from the perspective of other women who've been married to men who are on the spectrum, is to be very careful of how long you spend in that information, because some of it can be very dismal and it's honest, but if you spend too much time there, you will not be able to see your way forward. And I've been there myself where I was reading and it was overwhelming. So I think having the different perspectives is important. So you're learning. And also the goal is to realize something is happening internally for your spouse or for your kids. And then there's an external reaction. When you begin to understand an autistic point of view of life, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but you understand that perspective. When they have an external reaction, you begin to understand what is maybe the internal processing that happened beforehand. Sometimes they themselves may not be aware of it. They may not be aware that they are overstimulated and overstressed, and they have this reaction because of that. But as you begin to put the pieces together and you learn, you'll begin seeing these trends. Now, the next thing is tracking. Now that you understand what are autistic characteristics, and again, real quickly, a few of them, if you aren't familiar, talking about social interactions, that the general trend is that there can be difficulty with social interactions in a large group setting, either doing ones that are appropriate or knowing what to say, what to do. Communication challenges, taking terms literally. A great example I use is my kids will say to me, "Mom, I didn't hit my sibling," because the verb they would choose is push. And from my perspective, I'm like, it doesn't matter. You did something to your sibling. But you see where I'm going there. They felt right. Just like, no, I didn't hit my sibling. And they felt offended. It's like, why are you're accusing me of something I didn't do? When I got the correct verb, then they said, oh yeah, I did push them. And also there's the other half of it, which is oftentimes kids are neurodiverse. They feel very aware of how many mistakes they made. They want to avoid it. But there is a good portion of actual correct verb tense and noun tense is needed. And that's why there are these communication challenges where, like for myself, if someone said like, oh, why did you hit that person? And I would be like, oh, well, I actually pushed them, but I see what you're saying. Like that could be taken as I hit them, but that's not what I did. I would do the translation myself. Also, difficulty understanding other people's viewpoints, perspectives. That oftentimes is called mind blindness, is another term that's used. Having a sensory either challenges, either they're seeking things out, maybe too much, or they're avoiding certain sensory experiences. There's a repetitiveness often, either in the routines, they're very routine orientated, or they're seeking out the same interests over and over again, or maybe they're doing repetitive movements. And it's not only the movement of their hands, it can be other type of repetitive movements that happen. Again, not assigning anything bad or good to this, just stating what their experience is. And executive functioning, the ability to start task and end task, the ability to understand the bigger picture in situations such as metacognition, understanding when you're in a room and someone's crying because they got bad news, and you saw the bad news, and all of a sudden the person brings up a funny story and a joke, and everyone's like, what are you doing? Don't you understand? They're not getting the big picture. There can be other executive function skills, such as multiple steps. Laundry is an example, making a meal, things that are difficult for them. All these things you're observing, and you're just tracking down, not with judgment, but just observing reactions to food, reactions to different sensory stimulus, communication challenges, and your tracking is helping you, one, confirm that you're not crazy, two, to understand you remember action XYZ happening, but how often has it happened? And when you track it, it helps you to see the true patterns and trends and make you realize, you know what? This is not a behavior I need to be concerned about. This is a normal behavior. I'm just adding more to it. Or you notice like, wow, yeah, every single time I feed my child yogurt, they're having this big reaction because the yogurt gets in their fingers and they hate the feeling and they throw the bowl. And wait, they did the same thing with applesauce. So you're looking for information, for trends to help you see like what I think I'm seeing is it what I'm really seeing. And step number 3 is diagnosis. You're seeking a provider for diagnosis. And the reason why I think the learning and tracking is important to happen first is one, the more you learn, the easier it is for you to catch people who are well-meaning but not experts. It's the best way for me to explain it. You will know when someone is maybe wanting to be helpful, but they really aren't qualified to be doing a diagnosis. Also, you will have a familiarity with terms before you jump into the process. And because of your tracking, you're able to provide data and information to the practitioner to help them with a diagnosis. One way to begin this process is talking to your pediatrician or your spouse's doctor and asking them for referrals. Again, only ask them for the names of someone, and then you need to do some follow-up work and checking them out. Also, asking your pediatrician for their opinion may or may not be helpful to you. Our provider, who I really appreciate, had asked them many times over the years, and there's something going on. I am concerned. I think there's autism happening. I cannot tell you how many times every single checkup I would ask about my kids, saying, well, these milestones are being met, or these milestones are being met, but they're having problems looking at me in the eye. And my provider would spend 30 seconds looking over the child and say, nope, they're fine. I don't see any concerns there. My point of the story is not to shame my provider. My provider has amazing experience in certain areas, but not in diagnosis. Yes, and maybe in the extreme areas, it will stand out to that person. But generally speaking, oftentimes they will not catch the other signs. And it's the ongoing relationship that helps you notice it. And I did not ignore my mom gut. My gut told me there is something going on. And if I don't know what is the thing that we're dealing with, how can I help? Because otherwise I'm just trying all these different activities. Like maybe I'm a bad mom. Maybe I'm not disciplining well. I had all these questions I was thinking until I had the what actually are we dealing with? Then I could have a plan. Otherwise, I was just throwing stuff against the wall, hoping something would work out. And oftentimes nothing really did. And it makes sense now. Asking your provider for referrals is great. And when you look at someone to do a diagnosis, a couple of tips is one, if you're looking for a diagnosis for an adult, does this person have experience diagnosing adults? Not as a side thing, like, oh yeah, I've done that a couple times. Have they spent at least 30 to 40 to 50% of their time, minimum, doing diagnosis? A decent portion of working with adults, not children, because if they're diagnosing adults, they need to be around and see how the autistic diagnosis expresses itself as an adult. I've seen the mistake where people have worked with children, tried to diagnose adults, and they don't understand the carryover. Also, when it's a side thing, they're just trying to help people out. They don't have enough experience and oftentimes will miss the diagnosis and cause more problems. Also, I looked for lived experience. And so if a practitioner is younger, oftentimes I would avoid them. I had 3 different people, I think actually 4, I took my kids to before I finally got the formal diagnosis. And those people who I had problems with were way too young. They were scared to give a diagnosis. They kept saying, well, it could be this, it could be that, but they honestly did not have enough experience to give a diagnosis. And I didn't know that back then. I didn't think that through. And now I can look back and say, oh, wait a second. That was the issue there. And I remember looking through my notes that they was like, well, maybe we can wait a couple more years because their experience, they were afraid of making a mistake. So you're looking for someone who is older, has done this before. Now, the only caveat to this, sometimes providers will list they have a child or a parent, they have lived experience with autism on an ongoing basis. In those scenarios, I'm a little more open because this is someone who has seen it day in and day out and understand it. Something to consider. But again, if it's just someone who is in the mental health field and they want to help out and sure they can do it, I would highly suggest to keep going and looking for someone else. You can get evaluations done online. There are many people who can do that. And final thing, if they will not consider your input as a spouse into the diagnosis process, that is a red flag. Completely red flag. Dr. Tony Atwood talks about a 360-degree evaluation process where as many people as possible from the individual's life you're getting data from. And if the practitioner will not accept that, I would move on. Same thing applies for children. If someone is just a mental health, I shouldn't say just, if someone is a mental health provider, they're doing great work, but they do not have experience diagnosing children, I would go in a different direction completely. One of my kids was being observed and evaluated for autism, and the provider was amazing that we had, the one we eventually found, who knew enough about kids and who had years and years of experience. With one child, they were having difficulty. Well, I'm not sure about this one. Part of the challenge was that, in a good way, I had made so many adjustments at home that this child wasn't showing some of the behaviors that my other children had at that point. Because I already had begun making adjustments as I learned about what was needed. When they observed my child in a group setting, such as a daycare setting or a school setting, that was oh my goodness, this is very clear. I can see the challenges your child is having here. If you're doing an online evaluation process, I suggest sending them a couple of videos of your child in a group setting. That can help them observe and see how do they interact. Are they doing parallel play at the age of 8 when really they should be doing cooperative play back and forth? The practitioner will be looking for all those different signs. So again, having that experience is so important, especially for your spouse. Oftentimes a spouse will take one opportunity to go through the diagnosis process, which is lengthy. And if you get someone who doesn't understand special interests appropriately, it's not odd special interests. It is the intensity and how much time it takes. And so they don't understand how it looks like an adult. They can misdiagnose, and then your spouse say, okay, I guess I don't, but you still aren't working on your communication as a couple then, because you don't have the same problem in mind. So it's very important to have a person who is aware. Saying all this, I hope this gives you some ideas of how to move forward. Again, learn, just be open to learning. 2, track and observe. You're trying to see, you've learned about autism, but now what I'm seeing in my family and my spouse and my kids, just begin tracking. And then you have the data when you go to the diagnosis portion. Remember, this is a journey we're on, almost like an ultra marathon. We need to keep a pace that we can handle. We also need to remember that our husband and our kids are human beings, and they do have a unique way of going about life. And as other couples who are married from 2 different cultures need to learn how to communicate, how to meld the different cultures together, the same thing needs to happen here, but both the husband and the wife have to be on the same page. Quick caveat again, with this area is understanding autistic behavior does not mean we excuse hurtful behavior. Completely understandable that being around loud screaming, bright lights is going to cause someone to be irritated. However, hurting loved ones, yelling at them, taking things out on them is not okay. So I want to clear that up, is that the goal is for your spouse to understand, is their culture, is it neurodiversity? And to understand if that is the case, okay, how can I understand myself and how can I communicate, because I'm in this relationship, and for you to learn to understand their perspective and how are ways that you can adjust and how you do life to be working together towards a family community that is respectful of each other.
Hey, thank you for joining me today. I pray this episode gave you encouragement to take one small step. If so, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help other women find this show. By the way, if you're loving this conversation and want more encouragement like this, join my email list at bit.ly/myselfcare. That is bit.ly/myselfcare. I have a planner launching soon that will help you put all this into action in your own life. I look forward to chatting with you again next week for another episode.